Insiders, you asked and I delivered. The request was for Gavin Ashendon, the late Queen's former royal chaplain, to come onto the channel. I am bringing you an exclusive look at the interview I did with him, where we discussed King Charles, Islam, British politics, and why he believes the House of Windsor is on fire. Take a look at this, and linked in the description to this video is a link to the full live stream. Life feels very different now. We cannot have this conversation without bringing up King Charles, who is defender of the faith, allegedly. Do you feel like he is doing a good job?
Well, again, I have to ask you who you think he's doing the job for. If he's doing a job for us, I scarcely think he could be worse. I've written about why that is. I mean, there came a point where, particularly this last Christmas speech, I began what I had to say on YouTube by saying, look, I'm fed up with just saying how terrible this is. I need to say what he's done, not just what he's done wrong, but what he should be doing right for us. And again, I think that if you and I have a conversation, it ought to be, yes, here are the things that are wrong. They're really terrible. We're in really, really serious trouble. But how can we put it right? And I think that's, that seems to me to be the responsibility for those who shout fire. They need to say where the fire is, how bad it is, where the fire blankets and the extinguishers are, and can we save the house? It's not just enough to run up and down and say, heck, I'm afraid of burning. It's not just us, it's our whole culture. It's our country, it's our culture. It's actually Western history, just this particular moment. So we need to be as sensible as we are alarmed and look for solutions.
We've seen King Charles have the call to prayer at Windsor for the Islamic Muslim community. We've seen him sign on to be patron of the Islamic Centre in Oxford. This is all dressed up as cohesion and understanding other faiths. Do you feel that the defender of the faith should be aligning himself so deeply with an ideology and religion that ultimately wouldn't do anything for Christianity, for the faith he's meant to defend?
Wow, that's multi-layered, and I could waffle, but I'll try not to waffle. There's long form and there's long form.
We're in no rush, Gavin.
So first of all, I think most of us today recognize that we have two parts of our brain. One which feels like it's dealing with a conspiracy theory all the time, and it's frightening. We think, am I going mad? Why is my brain on permanently running a fire alarm saying you're in such trouble, run? And the other part of the brain that says, well, there are probably some sensible explanations for this, so let's try and deal with those. So let's do both. Let's look at the sensible explanations and then see whether or not the fire alarm part of the brain is actually, its circuits are working. So the sensible part is that part of the genius of the monarchy was to embody the values of the country, and the Commonwealth was part of it. The Commonwealth, I think, was a very good thing. I don't actually believe there's such a thing as racism. I think there are differences at all points, and you deal with the differences well or badly. They come as a threat or an enrichment. To try and turn that into a kind of thought crime that has to do with the shade of someone's skin is just stupid. We need to be far more grown up than that. The Commonwealth was a very good idea in terms of if the British were going to go out and take over the world and dominate it, there was an exchange that took place. We got territory, minerals, economic stimulus, and they got roads, medicine, education, culture, and technology. And, those are good things. So did they have a choice? No, they didn't have a choice, but actually that's how the world works. They were probably lucky to get the British rather than the Germans or the Belgians. The Belgians were pretty nasty to people in Africa. Hercule Poirot gives a misleading approach of what the Belgians can do when they're unrestrained. So, they got the British, and okay, there was an exchange, and it despite all the BLM nonsense and the idiotic slavery reparation rubbish that sub-cretinous person who used to be Archbishop of Canterbury got involved with. I'm just sorry. It's you can't even manage respect when it's that stupid. The exchange wasn't bad on both sides. Obviously, it could be made better, but it wasn't bad. And so the royal family represented the benign way of doing something useful for the Commonwealth. And I think probably people in the last 50 years would say, well, it's quite well done. As a kind of cultural, a show of cultural enrichment everywhere. There's nothing wrong with cultural enrichment as long as it's not a euphemism for something else. And so in that sense, Charles was brought up to say the Commonwealth is a good thing. He had a tutor. What was his name? The tutor was a hero, a follower of Carl Gustav Jung, and the name will come back to me shortly. But essentially, he turned the young Charles into a kind of Jungian, a sort of therapeutically aware relativist who thought religion on the whole was a very good thing. Lawrence van der Post was his name.
Oh yeah.
And Lawrence van der Post is an interesting man. I taught psychology at university for 25 years, and when we look at Jung, we look at some of the major exponents, and Lawrence van der Post was one of them. So this was an early influence on Charles. Some good to be said, some dangers in it, but that's what it was. And then he began to develop an interest in Islam, and that looked like a sort of a piece of cosmopolitan eccentricity. Why shouldn't he? There's all kinds of interesting things in Islamic history and culture. And we thought, oh, well, this is Charles being culturally enriched, doing his kind of Commonwealth act, aren't the royal family. And the fact is, Charles wasn't very clever. So it was a kind of sign of grown-up interest in something else, and good for him in looking over the garden walls, and therefore some credit to him. But the problem with Islam is that there are different versions of it, in the same way there are different versions of Christianity and of Baha'i, and there are some very violent Buddhist activists, as well as people who sit in ashrams and contemplate nirvana. You have to define what you're talking about. And Islam is as complex as anything else. So what kind of Islam was Charles interested in? Well, obviously in Islam that appeared to be benign, good at mathematics, good at art, good at Middle Eastern architecture and culture, nothing wrong with that. Except that if you know about Islam is in fact a totalitarian movement of the I would have to say far right, and use the word sincerely, which has the ambition to take over the world, remove human rights, it doesn't believe in them, and impose some degree or other something that looks like Sharia law. That's real Islam. And one of the tricks that's been played on us is to invent a term called Islamism. And Islamism is the pretense that the political side of Islam is separate and different from its religious side and not very good. But the thing is, people don't understand Islam. What they need to know is everyone mistakes it for being a kind of Middle Eastern Christianity or Judeo-Christianity. It isn't at all. Muhammad started off as a prophet. He got these experiences from an angel, and the angel said he was called Gabriel. And Muhammad, who wasn't a fool, a very competent guy, said, well, you might be angel, you might be Gabriel, you might not. What if you're not? And then this is where the satanic verses come in, because in the Quran he says, what if I'm being fooled? Sensible question. Gabriel said, no, you're not being fooled. It's all okay. So Muhammad calmed down, decided he wasn't being fooled. It really was Gabriel. And then he got a series of mysterious messages that form the Quran, notionally from Gabriel. And but what he'd done was, if you'll just forgive a very brief lecture, he'd set himself up as the latest Jewish prophet. And you might say, well, that's a bit odd. What's an Arab doing setting himself up as a Jewish prophet? The thing is, the Jews had all these very exciting interruptions from heaven for 1,000 years. So the excitement of the Old Testament, which is an amazing book, is that here are these nomadic people sitting in Israel trying to keep the Philistines and the Amalekites and the Amorites away from them. And they keep on getting these guys saying, God's got plans for you. And they say, yeah, no, we're not interested in that. We'd like, the harvest and we'd like to be left alone. And they say, no, you're chosen. God's got plans for you. And so for 1,000 years, these prophets do. And they say the most interesting things. And they've actually got to do with a very high degree of ethics. And then they get the 10 Commandments. And there's nothing like the 10 Commandments in the whole of world literature. And also the Genesis story of creation, which is a fantastic parallel to what actually science teaches, except the Genesis stuff answers the question why, and the Science tells us how. So the whole Jewish thing is very, very interesting and immensely powerful, and very few people take it seriously. Muhammad took it seriously. And he said, why haven't the Arabs had any of these prophets? He was kind of early Arab nationalist. That's me. I'm the Jewish equivalent to the Arabs of 1,000 years of prophets. I'm really quite, and here it goes. And then he said, and Gabriel says, of course you are. That's exactly who you are. And you're in the line of Abraham and Moses and Jesus and Miriam. But the problem was that the people who were given these names had completely different characters to the real ones in the Old and the New Testament. So in other words, these figures were given names, but they weren't the same people. They were, if you like, deceptive mimicry. And then, having tried to be a prophet and interest people in his latest, I'm the latest mouthpiece of God, the people in Mecca said, no, you're not. You're very ordinary. You're a naughty boy. You're a very ordinary person. All this stuff in the Quran is a bit gobbledygook. We're not interested. Go away. And amongst the people who said that to him in Mecca were Christians and Jews, and he needed the Jews to say, yes, you are indeed. We're so grateful. You are the latest prophet. And he needed the Christians to say, yeah, Jesus got it wrong. He wasn't the Son of God. He didn't rise from the dead. Actually, thank goodness you've come along, because you're obviously better than he is. And it won't surprise you to know that neither the Jews or the Christians were inclined to take him that seriously. So he then turned himself into a warlord, and he went to Medina, which he captured, killed everyone who disagreed with him, and said, basically now you can accept me as a prophet at the edge of the sword. And this was terribly successful. and he'd hit upon a winning strategy, which is say, I'm a prophet, I'm going to tell you how to organize your society, and if you don't do it, I'll kill you. And one of the first people, it was a Jewish tribe who said, we don't think you are. He attacked them, and he lined up 400 of their men, and some stories say he beheaded them personally, and others say he got other people. But he cut the heads of 400 Jews who said, no, you're not, and lost the battle. And that started Islam's great outreach into the world to turn the whole world into an Islamic republic dominated by Sharia law, by the Quran, by the Hadith, the sayings, and Sharia. And that's Islam. There's no such thing as Islamism. What you've got is it's Muslims who apply Islam, or Muslims who try and have a quiet life because they're Muslims and don't really want the whole Monty, full Monty. But there are lots of Muslims who always want the full Monty. And that's what we're seeing going on in Iran at the moment. And the Iranians are saying, but we're Persians. We were never Arab fundamentalists. It's true that the last king of Persia was a bit of a totalitarian bastard and made life very difficult for us. And we mistakenly allowed these ayatollahs in. We made a mistake. We made a terrible mistake. We want them off our back. Please free us from Islam. And then the United Arab Emirates are saying at the moment, well, I know we're Muslim, but actually we'd like to kind of tone down the Islamic bit. And therefore, we're not going to send our students to the Great Britain, because the kind of Islam they're getting is so dangerous that we will become the new Iran. So we are very frightened of the Muslims in Britain at the moment. They're the worst kind of devotees of hardcore Islam. And when J.D. Vance says, which is the first Islamic republic to get the nuclear bomb, and he says it's probably Great Britain, he's not joking. And so the reason I offer you that small lecture is because when you say King Charles got interested in Islam, what kind of Islam was he interested in? It was presented as though he was interested in Islamic weaving of carpets and the design of minarets, and those moments when Muslims were really extremely good at mathematics, and indeed they were. But actually, what we're facing, what kind of Islam have we faced in the 20th century? We've faced a very seriously growing militant combination of religion and politics that is absolutely determined to take over every other society. And we have become lazy, corrupt, self-satisfied. I think probably the effort of, first of all, fighting the European Civil War in the First World War, and then finding ourselves fighting the terrible dangers of totalitarian communism on one hand and fascist nationalism from the Nazis on the other. It exhausted us. And then, but when you're exhausted, you need a source of renewal. You need. There's a lovely verse in one of the Old Testament prophets that says, "Without a vision, the people perish." Well, we lost our vision. The question is, what's our vision? And I hope in a way your conversation with and mine is about the restoration of vision, because otherwise the people perish. And our culture lost its vision in the exhaustion of the Second World War and hasn't found it yet. If we don't find it, we're going to have one imposed on us, either from the left or from the right. So we better hurry up and find one.
You spoke about which side of Islam is King Charles potentially aligned with. Through my research, I found that in 2010, Prince Charles at the time was selling halal meat. It was lamb in his duchy range. And then people asked for it to be taken off, and it was. But if we go back, that's 16 years ago. For him to be infiltrating our meat market in a Christian country with halal meat is a very strange move for a man that claims he just wants to understand Islam. Do you not think?
I do. And so this is the point when the other side of the brain, where the fire alarm is going off, is trying to catch our attention. And we need to put the two sides of our brain together. So here is Prince Charles being in my benign version, being eccentric, responsible, liking the Commonwealth, liking multiculturalism, casting his eye over the main faiths, informing himself, finding things of enrichment, all perfectly sensible and fine. Except that halal is the most dreadful example of cruelty to animals. And why would you ever take a barbaric practice, which is so horrible to animals, and make any excuses for it whatsoever? I mean, there are none. So why would he then adopt that as part of the duchy? Had to sit down and have a strategic decision. You had to have people around a table saying, someone had to say, I know, let's promote this example of the most diabolical cruelty to animals for part of the food market. And around the rest of the table, there should be lots of sensible grown-ups who said, no, let's not. But the people who said, let's do this one day, how did they do that? So this is where the fire alarm going off says they can only have done that if they weren't what they seemed to be. So again, one of the reasons for dealing either with mental illness or with demonic is you ask the question, is there a straightforward naturalistic explanation for this? And if there is, you say, well, okay, that's it. But when you in the absence of one, you have to find the other reasons, even if they're a bit challenging or zany or off the map. And sometimes they are. So in this particular one, the only other explanation is that somebody with Islamic allegiance decided it was worth taking the risk to put the reputation of the whole establishment at risk in order to introduce halal. Well, that's a very odd thing to do. And it's not even as if the numbers, what are the numbers in our country? I think the Islamic population is about 7 or 8%. In France, it's 10 or 11%. And for the whole of my lifetime, I've been saying, I'd like to refer to a Cairo taxi driver. But to keep the thought, why would he do that? Because the numbers weren't enough. So now let's shift to numbers. I was being driven through Egypt in about the year 2000, and my taxi driver was a Copt, and I'd been at a retreat at a Coptic Orthodox monastery. And the taxi driver asked me about it. I said, "Oh, I'm Coptic Orthodox too." He said, "You've got to watch out in England because you know what happened to us, don't you?" And I said, well, I think I do, but tell me what happened to you. He said, well, we were Christian in Egypt. There weren't any Arabs here. We're not an Arabic country. The main character of the population was Coptic Orthodox. And the Arabs came in and they outbred us. And to begin with, they were nice neighbors. And then the moment they gained the upper hand, they began to persecute us. And they now blow us up, close down our churches, persecute us, and kill us, and force us to be Muslims at the edge of the sword. So you don't want that. That's how they work. You don't want that in England.
If you value these full narrative, nuanced conversations coming directly to your inbox, please hit that subscribe button and continue to support my independent journalism.